so much everyone for joining me. My name's Iona Silverman. I'm a partner at Freeths in the IP and media team, and I do a lot of work on influencer agreements, on advising clients on how to work with influencers and how to comply with the ASA legislation. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. It's a matter of housekeeping first, just to let you know this webinar is being recorded. Please do feel free to ask questions as we go. I'd really like to make this helpful for you. And I know from experience, this is an area that people have got a lot of questions in. So if I can address any of them as we go, I'd really like to put them in the chat function, jump in on the microphone. If I don't see them on the chat, Louis might give me a bit of a prompt, but I'm really happy to answer questions. Equally, I'm not going to be picking on anyone, so if actually what you'd like to do is stick your headphones in and go for a walk and listen, then please feel free to. Just about trying to make this as helpful as possible for people. So what are we going to cover today? We're going to cover the consequences of getting it wrong, first of all, so that you know why you should care, and then we're going to cover what the law is. We're going to talk through a few practical tips on making sure you're getting it right, both in the UK and globally. We're going to talk about authenticity, about agreements with influencers, about ASA complaints. Then we're going to talk about influencer fraud and finish off talking about virtual influencers. So there's quite a lot to get through. I will try and get through it in an hour, but it's just one of those topics that I honestly could talk about all day long. So to the extent I don't cover anything that you're interested in today and I don't answer your questions, please feel free to get in touch. I'm really happy to talk to anyone about this topic. So first of all, what is an influencer? I mean, you might think, this question is about teaching grandmothers to suck eggs on the basis that everyone knows what an influencer is. It's someone who affects the purchasing decisions of others. But the point I really wanted to make here was that for the purposes of the law, it doesn't really matter what you label someone. They could be a brand ambassador, they could be an affiliate, a partner, a representative. I don't really care whether you call them an influencer or not. The point is, do they meet the criteria for posting advertising material on social media? So that's what we're going to cover today, is how do you know when something's an ad and therefore someone is an influencer? So when I talk about influencers today, I do mean your classic sort of either micro or macro influencers on social media, but the content is equally applicable to brand ambassadors who might post online for you. So just bear that in mind. As I said in this slide, they could be someone who is a full-time influencer, or it could be someone who has a really successful career in sports or in music or in film, who acts as a brand ambassador for you. And equally, they could have millions of followers or they could just have a few thousand. It doesn't really matter what their reach is. They could still be caught by the legislation. So now we've figured out what an influencer is, let's talk about why you should care. So in September 2020, the ASA undertook a 3-week monitoring exercise to review the Instagram accounts of 122 UK-based influencers to see whether the advertising content they were putting out was being properly disclosed. And surprise, surprise, it was not. They looked at over 24,000 Instagram stories, and they made a point that obviously these rules apply not only to Instagram, but to all social media and any content online. But it was just Instagram that they focused their review on because that's where they saw there being a particular problem. And they found that only 35% of advertising stories were clearly labeled and obviously identifiable as such, i.e. a really small proportion. And they said the level of non-compliance is unacceptable. So what did they do about it? They contacted all the influencers, and they also contacted a number of brands to put them on notice and said that if any future spot checks that they carried out on any platform revealed problems, they would take in. Now that was back in 2020. Since then, they've got a sort of naughty list on the ASA's website, which lists number of influencers who repeatedly failed to disclose advertising content. The ASA does take this issue really seriously and increasingly so, and it's not the only one. The thing about the ASA is it doesn't actually have the teeth to impose fines. So all it can do is tell you to take content down, which is relatively easily achieved. But obviously, the PR fallout from that is often not worth it. So I think that's what you need to bear in mind, is actually, practically speaking, if the ASA come after you, you can take content down, but it's not going to look great. And some brands don't care about that, and some brands really do. I should also point out that the ASA's review of the Instagram ads found that the ads largely fell into the sectors of beauty, clothing, and leisure. Not massively surprising, because those are huge sectors for influencers. However, it found that no sector out of those or any other sectors stood out as having an acceptable rate of compliance, i.e., we all know that those are big sectors for influencers, but they are increasingly being used across other sectors. I'd say all sectors at this stage, and actually the ASA is very clear that they can see that no one's complying. So just because you don't fall into one of those key beauty, clothing, leisure sectors doesn't mean the ASA hasn't got eyes on you. Another point to note is that while the ASA is the primary body dealing with influencer content as an advert, the CMA, the Competition and Markets Authority, also has the remit to sanction false or deceptive messages, messages that leave out important information, use of aggressive sales techniques, etc. And if you break the CAP code, the regulation, the CMA can report you to trading standards, and trading standards does have the power to fine, prosecute, imprison. I don't think we're about to see influencers go to prison. That's not what I'm saying. But I just wanted to flag that whilst the ASA really, has got very narrow enforcement powers, there are others out there who have wider enforcement powers. And as I said, this is an issue that's increasingly being looked at by regulators. So it's definitely one to take seriously, and just to think about what you're doing in your organisation, and are there some small steps you could be taking to reduce the risk that you're taking. One quick slide on the online safety bill. So this is a bill that is progressing incredibly slowly through Parliament. It relates to online safety in its broadest sense. So you'll see on this slide, we're trying to get rid of hate, abuse, fear, vitriolic content online. And I think we can all agree that influencers are not the worst thing that has happened online, but I think we can also agree that sometimes if their content is misleading, that is perceived as not a good thing. And as such, the online safety bill does capture specifically user-generated and influencer content. Now, Ofcom is going to be the regulator for the online safety bill, and they will have a range of enforcement powers, including the power to levy substantial fines of up to £18 million or 10% of global turnover. So these are bigger than the GDPR fines. This, Ofcom will have a huge power here. I don't want you to worry unnecessarily about the online safety bill, because it's not going to apply to brands. It's going to apply to online technology platforms. So it's going to apply to the YouTubes, the Googles, the Facebooks, the Instagrams of this world. And the aim is to get them to take some kind of responsibility for the content that's being posted on their platforms. It's not going to apply to influencers, and it's not going to apply to brands. However, I think that when it comes through, we will see the big tech platforms pass some of that liability down, probably by way of contract in their T's and C's. So it's definitely something to be aware of, because I think that tech platforms will start tightening up how they run things and what kind of content can be posted on their sites. So it's definitely one to have an eye on. Everything that I've said so far relates to the UK. Obviously, when we post anything online, it can be viewed in any country, and as such is subject to the regulations of every country. Now, obviously, it is impossible to know the laws of every country and try and adhere to every single one, but I just wanted to put a slide in on the US and what they're doing there to show you that it is taken seriously in lots of countries. So last year, Teamy, a detox tea company, was fined $1 million based on its Instagram influencer ads. The pack claimed that it would help consumers lose weight and that its other teas helped fight cancer, decrease migraines, and treat colds. Now, obviously, anyone making claims to fight cancer that can't be substantiated are incredibly serious, and that's why this fine was so huge. And you would hope that most people would not be quite so short-sighted as to put something like that online, but it's just worth noting that the FTC is taking influencer content really seriously. And it's not just the US and the UK, it's every country in the world that's really looking at this at the moment. So again, whilst you can't comply with every law in the world or even know every law in the world, you need to think on a global scale if you are targeting other countries with your content. If you're just targeting the UK, whilst your content could be viewed abroad, I think it's highly unlikely that any other regulator would be interested in taking action against it. But to the extent you're targeting consumers in other countries, or you're using influencers from other countries to target the UK audience, but that you may incidentally target others in other countries, you do need to have a global view of things. So with all that in mind, what are the rules? The rules are really clear, so say the ASA. It must be obvious to consumers before they like or otherwise interact with a social media post if what they are viewing is advertising. In most cases, the use of #ad or similar is the clearest way of communicating the commercial nature of social media content. So basically, if you are putting out an advert, you need to use #ad. And the reason the ASA thinks that the rules are clear, you want your consumers not to be misled. It should be obvious to your consumer what is going on. You don't want them to be confused. So what is an advert? If you pay for content, or if you as a brand exert any form of control over content, you should be using, or the influencer should be using, #ad. So that's your basic rule. It's payment or control equals #ad. What do I mean by payment? Obviously, if you give somebody money in order that they post, and even if you have no control over what they post, if you pay them, that obviously constitutes payment, but it's broader than that. It also includes gifts and freebies, which is a massive grey area, which I'll come on to talk a bit more about. It also covers the provision of discount codes or affiliate links. So it's quite broad, and control is also quite broad. It can mean that you as a brand have control over the content. It can mean that you have control over the messaging. It can mean that you have control over the timings of post, or that you have a right to review content before it's posted, even if you never exercise that right. So if you have the right to review content, you still have control over the post, and therefore the influencer should be using #ad. Now, I'm aware that practice, there's some massive grey areas that come up, and I think the law is not clear on that, and there's not much case law on this. So I think it's about drawing sensible conclusions, and each brand will have a different level of risk that they are willing to undertake, and you have to figure out where you are on that scale. So what about gifted product? I got asked about this about 15 years ago, and I said, if product is gifted, it constitutes a payment, and therefore influencers should be using #ad. And I got told that was absolute rubbish, but it is not rubbish, and it is absolutely the case that if you are gifting product, influencers should be using #ad. Now, I'm conscious that there is a difference between a brand that, say, gifts their brand ambassador product and expects them to wear it, versus a brand that is seeding product to a number of different influencers and journalists, hoping that someone will pick it up, but not having any control over the content. In the latter case, it is still a gifted product, and people still should be using #ad. Now, how you enforce that is really a question for you as a brand. I know one brand that I think takes the quite sensible approach of sending a nice postcard out with every piece of product that they gift, saying, we really hope you enjoy our product. If you post about it on social media, please use #ad. They put it a bit nicer than that, but essentially that's the gist of it. They're saying, look, we know the rules. We're telling you what the rules are. whether you as an influencer comply with those rules, we can't enforce, but we are asking you to do the right thing. And I think as such, they've put themselves on the right foot. But what do you do if a celebrity genuinely loves your brand and is just wearing it online? Now, again, there are shades of grey here. If someone just genuinely loves your brand and is wearing it, that is fine. They don't need to put #ad in their posts. If you have sent them a freebie and they are wearing it, irrespective of whether they genuinely love it or not, they should be using #ad. I think the grey area really comes when you seed some product, someone wears it, and they do genuinely love it. And 5 years down the line, they are still wearing it. Do they need to use #ad then? No, probably not. If 2 years down the line, they're still wearing it, do they need to use #ad? Probably not. If 6 months after you've gifted it, they love it and they're wearing it, do they need to use #ad? Probably. So there is a grey area there. There's no hard and fast rule as to when someone should or is able to stop using #ad. It's a matter of judgment on your part and on the celebrity's part. There's a question around working with charities. I have clients who send product to charities that they are affiliated with, and they say, surely charities don't need to use #ad because they're a charity and we're making a charitable donation by giving us this product. But I say, really, you are giving them the product in the hope that they will post people wearing that product online. Therefore, yes, it may be a charitable donation, but it is essentially a gift, and so therefore you should be asking them to use #ad too, which might not sit comfortably with the charity, but if you have an affiliation with them, that's a conversation that you do need to have. What about affiliate marketing? I've talked about that. If you're giving out discount codes or your affiliate marketing, then that does also count as an ad. Therefore, influencers should be using #ad. What about employee discounts? I had a client ask me about this the other day. They said, well, we give all of our employees a discount. They wear their content, they wear the products, and they might post online about it. I said, I think that's fine. I think it's accepted that everyone knows that employees have discounts, and it is expected that they would wear their brand's product. And most people's social media accounts do not justify the use of #ad. They're literally wearing a product and their friends and family might see it. Now, if you have an employee who has a large following, and you think that actually it's not just friends and family seeing it, you might want to consider that separately. But I'd say by and large, I wouldn't worry too much about employee discounts. Is there a difference between print and digital? This is an interesting question. So when I'm reading a magazine, I'm pretty well aware that there are some articles that look like they're articles, but actually at the top it says paid promotion. And we all know that that's just a fancy advert. Also, there will be pages of editorial, which will include a number of different products. I, as a consumer, may or may not be aware that those products likely have been gifted by brands. It's not actually the magazine who have gone scouring the high street for these products. However, the magazine is not required to disclose that. It's considered editorial, and some judgment has been exercised and some content has been written, and therefore it is not an advert. Now, interestingly, we don't really have that distinction in the online world. If you are, say you're writing a blog post and you have been gifted 5 different, pushchairs, and your 5 different pushchairs, you're going to review them and you're going to say what you think about them, then you do need to be disclosing that you have received those as gifts. So there is a distinction between print and digital. In the digital world, much more disclosure is expected, and people should be using #ad and disclosing that things are gifts. It's a weird discrepancy, but it's sort of a hangover from the fact that the laws have moved on, but the print world hasn't quite caught up. So those are some of my frequently asked questions. When you're using #ad, what should you use? So use hashtag ad or use hashtag advert. Those two are commonly accepted. The ASA have clearly said that they are acceptable. The ASA has clearly said that hashtag gifted, hashtag spur, hashtag spawn, hashtag AF, hashtag affiliate, words such as I'm so grateful to, with thanks to, supported by, are not acceptable because they are not clear. Consumers will not necessarily understand that it is advertising. And I've seen more recently the rise of hashtag ad gifted. The ASA hasn't come down one side or the other on that one to say whether it is permissible. My view is that they are very likely to say that it is not permissible. The reason being that the whole point of this hashtag is to make it really clear that something is an advert. And I don't think the word ad gifted makes that clear. I think it confuses the issue because even though it contains the word ad, it's just not quite clear what's being said. So I think the ASA will say, don't use it. Another reason to not use that and to use hashtag ad and hashtag advert is that we talked about complying with the laws globally and how that's not possible. If you use hashtag ad or hashtag advert, that is internationally recognized as the right thing to do, and that will comply with most regulations worldwide. If you start using hashtag ad gifted, I think it's highly unlikely that it will comply, because if it's confusing to a native English speaker, I can't imagine how confusing that word is to someone who's not a native English speaker. So I think in order to make sure that you're complying with the ASA and with all international laws that you can, then hashtag ad and hashtag advert are the right thing to use. You need to be clear. You need to make sure that the hashtag's clearly visible. Don't hide it at the end of text. Don't hide it below the line. It needs to be visible, and you need to be consistent. So if you have got a series of stories or reels or posts, don't think that posting it on one of them is sufficient. You need to post it on all of them. And don't rely on bios or past posts. So I've had someone say to me, oh, but so-and-so is our brand ambassador. So they'll say at the beginning of the season, they'll put a big post out that they're our brand ambassador and they'll put it in their bio, but do they have to put hashtag ad in every single post? Yes, they do. The overall message is just make it clear. Don't assume that your followers know that you're advertising something. They're not mind readers. Spell it out to them, which, is often what people don't want to do, but unfortunately it's what the law requires. And we'll talk in a minute more about authenticity. But in the meanwhile, I just wanted to flag advertising rules more broadly. I am not going to go into detail on these today because we don't have time. We are planning on running a webinar in a few months' time on advertising and marketing laws more broadly, and we can cover some of these then. But just be aware that if you are promoting something that relates to children, if you're promoting gambling, if you're promoting alcohol, there are very specific rules relating to those. If you need to be conscious of body image and of ensuring that your content is not misleading from a visual perspective. So for instance, filters are not a good idea. There have been a couple of ASA rulings around fake tan, would you believe, whereby the ASA has ruled that they were misleading and they have been taken down because a filter had been used. Think about comparative advertising. So that's when you say you compare your prices or your products directly with your competitors. You are allowed to do that, but there are rules around how you do it. And in particular, when it comes to influencers, think about promotions. There are rules around promotions. There was an ASA case just recently where a brand ran a promotion, and to select the winner, they asked an intern to close their eyes, and they scrolled through the list of people who had commented on the post, and the intern stuck out their finger to select the winner. That is not a legitimate way of choosing a winner. And I think, it might sound really silly now, but actually 10, 15 years ago, that's probably how it was done, but it's not how it's done now, and it's not okay. So there are rules around promotions. Make sure you've got your T's and C's right. Make sure you know how to select a winner, all those kinds of things. And if your influencers are running promotions, make sure that they know the rules too, because it's unlikely that they will. So authenticity, the double-edged sword. I just wanted a word on authenticity because you pay your influencer to share themselves. You know, the more authentic they are, the more they're going to drive engagement, which is great. And additionally, the ASA wants them to be authentic. The ASA wants them to disclose when they are advertising, wants them not to use filters in order to comply with their rules, not to mislead. You want them to be authentic because from a social and political standpoint, that is the right thing to do. However, a word of caution, you don't want them to be too authentic necessarily. I mean, Johnny Depp is the perfect example of this. So when I used to give this talk quite a number of years ago, I used to refer to Johnny Depp as the face of Dior, which he has been since 2015. And I used to say, I used to tell the story of how Johnny Depp and Amber Heard tried to smuggle some dogs illegally into Australia and how that was a bit of a silly thing to do and how it hit the press and, you know, did Dior care about that or not? Well, obviously things have taken a massive nosedive for Dior and Johnny Depp since then. At the end of 2020, he lost an attempt to overturn a High Court ruling that concluded that he had assaulted his ex-wife, Amber Heard, and left her in fear of her life. In the US at the moment, Johnny Depp has sued Amber Heard over a story that she wrote in which she described herself as a victim of domestic violence. Amber Heard has filed a counterclaim for $100 million. It's really hard to not have heard about this story, frankly, because it's constantly in the news. Johnny Depp is still the face of Dior Sauvage. So why is that, and what can you do to protect yourself against this kind of authenticity? What you want to consider is writing something into your influencer agreement that says that if an influencer brings the brand into disrepute or they themselves do something that brings their own personality into disrepute, that you can terminate the contract. That is how you get out of that. But, you know, just a word of caution against, it doesn't have to be as extreme as this example, but do you want to review all content that goes out? Do you want to have a handle on the messaging? In which case, you will definitely exert control, but you need to build that mechanism into your influencer agreement. Or actually, do you want them to be authentic and post? And to be honest, it will really depend on the brand and their ethos and their risk level as to what they want to do, but it's just something to think about. On the flip side, if you exercise too much control over your influencer, just be aware that not only might you lose authenticity, but there is a risk that your influencer could legally be your employee. Now, I'm not going to go into detail here because I'm not an employment lawyer, but it's just something to think about. If actually what you're doing is you're telling your influencer to post content, and when you say jump, they jump, and actually potentially you are their main source of income, and if you were to terminate, that would massively change things for them. There are risks that they could legally be deemed your employee, and that can have tax consequences and give them a right to unfair dismissal. So again, don't exert too much control, and or just be cognizant of the employment situation. And with that, let's just run through the influencer agreement and the things that you should think about putting in there. So first of all, be really clear about your messaging. What messaging do you want the influencer agreement, the influencer to cover? And what channels should they be posting on? And what are their deliverables? So my suggestion is be really granular about your deliverables. You know, this influencer will post 4 Instagram stories and 4 Instagram tile posts, 1 per month over the next 4 months. Of them wearing branded product. They will wear branded product at all opportunities that the press may turn up to, etc., etc. So be really clear as to what exactly you want from them. Now, I've just said that being really clear about that presents an employment risk, and it does. From my perspective, I think that it is helpful if you want to get the most out of your influencer to be really clear. And I think the employment risk is probably relatively low, but I'd say just be cognizant of it when you're drafting or reviewing your influencer agreement. Give deadlines for the creative content and captions to be submitted in advance to the brand for approval, if that's what you want, if you want to get that approval right. tell the influencer what handles and hashtags they should be including in captions. So you'll want them probably to tag your brand, tell them exactly which handle they should be using, and tell them they should be using hashtag ad. That doesn't protect you as a brand 100% if they fail to do that. However, you'd have a right in breach of contract. I'm not sure you necessarily want to sue your influencer for breach of contract, or that it will do you much good if they don't have much money, but putting it in there is definitely the right thing to do, and it sends the right message to them as to what you expect from them. Consider exclusivity. Can you negotiate exclusivity with them? Can you negotiate exclusivity just in your particular industry so that they don't work with your competitors, or just in your particular country, or do you have broader bargaining power to be able to claim a broader right of exclusivity? But definitely think about that, because you don't want them turning up with your competitor. Consider your termination rights. So yes, if they bring the brand into disrepute, can you terminate? If they become insolvent, can you terminate? If they do something that is considered a material breach of the contract, can you terminate? Is there any other reason you might want a way out? Consider an indemnity for breach. So if they breach the agreement, do you have an indemnity against them? So can you go after them for a particular sum of money to cover the damage that you've suffered because of that breach? Now, as I've said, I'm not sure you necessarily want to sue your influencer. Oh, thank you, Kevin. He's just put some comments in the chat around employment. So that's really helpful if anyone's interested. Louis, did you want to jump in with something? Got your hand up? No, I'll continue. So yes, I see you might not want to sue your influencer for breach of contract. It doesn't necessarily reflect that well on you as a brand. And equally, they might not have much money, to be frank with you, so they might not be worth suing them. However, it's worth putting that clause in the agreement. That way you've got it to fall back on if you need it. And again, it sends a clear message to the influencer, don't breach this agreement. Fees, consider paying in installments to keep motivation high. You want to keep them going, and consider whether any agency fees are included in the influencer's fee or whether that's separate. And also be clear that the influencer is not an employee. That's not going to be a foolproof solution. Just because you've said they're not an employee doesn't mean they're not an employee. But again, it puts you in the right direction to saying, well, no, there was never any intention that this was an employer-employee relationship, and the influencer understood that. So that's what I suggest you put in your agreement. Like I said, we negotiate these agreements a lot, and I've seen a lot of sort of relatively rough and ready agreements where people think they're being really clear, but when you read it through cold, it's not really clear what they mean. So I think my key takeaway from this is be as clear as you can be, and we're always very happy to look over an agreement if that's helpful. ASA complaints. What should you do if the ASA complains? Well, I've said they don't really have teeth to impose a fine. So definitely the first thing you should do is take your content down. That's really easily done on social media in a way that it isn't in printed press or billboards. So that's an easy win. The real risk with the ASA is a risk of negative publicity. And again, that is really, it depends on who you are as a brand as to how much you care about that. The naughty list that I said at the beginning, where they've got this list on the ASA website of influencers who don't comply, is 90% made up of ex-Love Island contestants. So I'd say they just generally don't care. And that, you know, if that's the view they take, then fine, so be it. But just take a view on what your risk appetite is as a brand. Bear in mind that 97% of the complaints that the ASA received last year were from members of the public. So it's all about appealing to the public and making sure that they don't want to complain. In addition to that, of course, the ASA is scouring the net for non-compliant content. So it's a double-edged approach there, appealing to both the ASA and your consumers. I'll move on to talk about influencer fraud. This is something that's definitely on the rise. So what is influencer fraud? There's a number of different ways that influencers can pretend to have a greater following than they actually have. So they can use click farms, which is where you have a factory of people in a low-cost jurisdiction who will sit and who will click like on all the content they're told to click like on. You can use automated bots that go around and write comments for you or click like. There is something called coerced engagement, or pods, where basically an influencer might enter a pod and everyone in that pod is responsible for liking and commenting on everyone else in the pod's content, so that they all get mutual likes and comments. And whilst that's not illegal, in contrast to the click farms and the automated bots, it's not a good idea because you lose authenticity. If you have someone commenting on your content who has nothing to do with it, it's just not going to look authentic, and therefore, in my view, is not worth it. But there you go. You can buy likes. They're not very expensive. You just go on Google and Google buy likes on Instagram. And we're also seeing more and more fake sponsored content. So that's where someone puts a post, but they're not an influencer, and they write on their post, oh, loving buying my hashtag X from this place today. They are not sponsored by X. They are not an influencer, but they are hoping that by writing content that makes it look like they're an influencer, someone will think, oh, this person's an influencer, they're quite interesting, I must engage them. So they are fishing for work by pretending that their content is sponsored when it's not. So there's all sorts of stuff going on about there, and it's no real surprise. But the question is, if it's a problem for you, what can you do about it? So number one, do your homework. Have a look at an influencer's followers to see if they look fake. Honestly, if you look through the comments, if you can see a lot of fake or nonsensical comments, then you'll know that there's something going on there. You can also look at their growth curve, and you can use technology like Social Blade to help you do that. If you see a massive increase in followers over a very short period of time, there is a possibility that could indicate that they have purchased that following in some way. And if you see a massive spike or a massive drop after that spike, there's a risk that that is because the social media site has got wind of it and has knocked them back. So if you see those upward and downward curves, that is a likely indicator of influencer fraud. So what can you do from a legal perspective if it's a problem? You could consider suing someone for passing off. So if someone's misrepresenting a connection with your brand, and which they don't have, and they're causing you damage, you could sue for passing off. You could think about misrepresentation. If someone's made an untrue statement which has induced someone else to enter into a contract, i.e. buy something, they could be liable for misrepresentation, and that could be fraudulent, it could be negligent, or it could be innocent misrepresentation. So there are a few options there. It's not something I've seen taken to court yet, but in my view, it's only a matter of time before we see a case along these lines. So the last thing I wanted to talk about today was virtual influencers. So virtual influencers are fictional, computer-generated characters or people. So they can look like real people, or they can look like fictional characters either. And they're given a personality, and they're given a backstory, and they act on social media platforms in exactly the same way as a real influencer would. There's obviously a massive pro for brands there, because they're more predictable and you can have more control over a virtual influencer. They are less likely to go off and do a Johnny Depp on you. They don't have a private life, so the risk is lower there. Virtual influencers tend to be backed by a team, meaning that they can be online 24/7, they never take a holiday, they don't have the quirks of the individual, because it's more like dealing with a company. Obviously, the massive con is authenticity. Do your consumers see through the influencer, and do they want a real human? If they're aware that it's a virtual influencer, and some of the really big virtual influencers are very clear as to exactly what they are, then that might be fine. I think I think the third most popular virtual influencer is Barbie. I don't think anyone thinks Barbie's a real person. Everyone knows that she's not, but she's still wields massive power. But there are other virtual influencers out there who look like people, and to all intents and purposes, if you're not aware, you could assume that that would be a real person, and that could be misleading in its own right. And then consistency, really. Will a team of people send out the same consistent message that one person might? Yes, I think they probably would, because they are sophisticated professionals, but will they put that same passion into it that a human being who is, responsible for their own image might? I don't know. So, there's pros and cons to using virtual influencers, but I think the real question is, are you misleading your consumers? Because if you are, we go right back to the start of this talk, and that's exactly what the ASA is trying to avoid. So, don't mislead your consumers. Virtual influencers are regulated in exactly the same way as other influencers. So you should be using #ad if you're using a virtual influencer or a real influencer. The ASA hasn't ruled on virtual influencers yet. Again, I think this is something that we're likely to see in the near future, but I think the key here is use #ad and make sure you're not misleading your consumers. And that really wraps up this talk, because I think if you take two things away from this talk is, consider when you should be using #ad, and the key is don't mislead your consumers. So with that, I finished everything that I had prepared. I'm really happy to take questions now. If anyone has any, or if anyone has any comments or wants to jump in and say anything, please do shout. Feel free to put the questions in the chat box, or to jump in. If there aren't any questions, I will wrap up, but as I said at the beginning, this session has been recorded. You're very welcome to have a recording, or to share the recording with any colleagues who couldn't make it today. And if there are any follow-up questions that you wanted to talk to me about without putting them on the chat, then please feel very welcome to get in touch. I am always happy to talk about this subject.